What are 3 reasons why incompetent professional service providers survive in the marketplace? That's a question I've thought a lot about. I've struggled with why that is. You know, my preference would be that those guys would just quickly go out of business, but they seem to be survivors. You know, they're like cockroaches. They just keep going and going and going and going, despite the headwinds that are often against them because of the way they do business. So why is that? Why do these firms survive for so long when they're not doing a good job for their clients? And what does that teach us? What lessons are there? If you're a real estate developer or a real estate investor, what can you do to not get stuck with one of those firms that's like a cockroach and that survives despite doing a bad job for almost everybody that they are in business with? Well, look, we're going to try and answer some of those questions. So just real quick, right at the beginning of the video, I just want to thank Dave Woolley and Associates for providing our lighting and audio gear. That was very generous of them. Mr. Woolley, one of my mentors, said, Landon, you really got to do something about the sound quality on your YouTube videos, and he got me the hookup. So anyways, thanks, Dave. We appreciate that. All right, so when I talk about incompetent professional service providers, what do I mean by that? By that phrase, what am I talking about? We need to define that, right? So a professional service provider is somebody that relies on technical expertise, specialized education oftentimes, to provide help to their clients. And not always, but typically if you're in a profession, you have some rights and privileges that come with that profession, but you also have some responsibilities either to your client or to the public. Okay, so I'll use land surveyors as an example. So in the state of California, you have to be a licensed land surveyor to establish property boundaries or retrace property boundaries. That is a right that I have as a licensed land surveyor in California, but it comes with some responsibilities. So for example, when I do a survey of a parcel that has not been mapped previously in California, I have a legal requirement to file a copy of my survey with the county surveyor. It's called a record of survey, and that survey has to follow certain rules. Okay, so as a land surveyor, I have some privileges that are granted my profession, but I also have some responsibilities as a member of my profession that have to be met. So that's what I mean by professional service provider. It's not just surveyors, it's architects, it's engineers, it's land use planners. Those are the folks that fill that role in the real estate realm. So when I talk about incompetent professional service providers, what do I mean by that term? What do I mean by a professional that's incompetent? Okay, so I really mean 2 things when I talk about incompetence. One is they're just not able to provide quality work products, and it's not just work products, but they're not able to perform their job as they should. So an example would be if you hired me, Landon Blake, to design your skyscraper, let's say for downtown Oakland that you wanted to build. I am not going to do a good job of that. I am going to be incompetent at that job. I wouldn't have the first clue about what goes into designing a skyscraper, and it would take me years and years and years to learn to do it right. So you wouldn't want to hire me for that job. I'm gonna perform that job incompetently, right? Your building's going to fall down. In fact, you won't even get it built because you won't be able to get my plans approved by the city. So that's one part of incompetence is you just can't do the job. You can't get the job done that people hire you for. Okay, the second part is just bad service, providing bad service. That's a part of incompetence. The most common thing I see or complaint I hear about from clients about other consultants is they're just non-responsive, so they don't communicate. That's very frustrating for clients, and it's just part of providing poor service. Another example is professional service providers that don't provide clear billing, so they send confusing or incomplete invoices. I know as a land surveyor running my own business, I often hire other professional consultants to help me with parts of my business. So for example, we have an IT consultant, and we have a certified accountant, tax accountant, and we have a business attorney. And one of the things I look for in those people is people that are going to give me a bill that I can understand and feel comfortable paying. So that's part of it too. So there's a lot of surveying and engineering, civil engineering firms that, in my opinion, are just incompetent. Now, a lot of people are going to get upset that I say that, but it's true. I deal with them on a regular basis, and I oftentimes get clients that are coming to my business because they've been dealing with an incompetent service provider and they're just frustrated. So this happens a lot. I remember a phone call I got a couple years ago. I was working for a large engineering company. And I got a call from a developer on a smaller project, and I answered the phone. He was highly upset. He says, Landon, I don't understand. He said, I hired this 500-person engineering firm to do this project, land development project for me. And he says, I've got land planners and civil engineers and geotechnical engineers and architects, all these people working on my project, supposedly working on my project. He said, the land surveyor is the only person I can get to answer the phone. He said, can you tell me why that is? I said, yeah. I said, I'm sorry. It's not acceptable, and we need to do something to change it. He said, well, I'm glad you answered the phone. He said, because if you weren't answering the phone, I'd have fired this company a long time ago. So that's just an example of what happens to people, right? And we get these stories here once a month. We get a phone call from somebody that's hired a civil engineer or a land surveyor, and they're not getting good service. They're not getting their phone calls returned. The consultant isn't doing what they promised they would do. So it happens a lot. It's a huge issue. So why do those companies survive? Why don't they just go out of business? This reminded me, if you start a restaurant and you serve bad food, you're usually not in the restaurant business very long. It's not going to take very long before you go out of business. Or if you start a restaurant and your wait staff is horrible and you provide bad service, you're probably not going to stay in business very long, right? And especially if you do both those things, if you got bad food and bad service, you're definitely not going to be in business very long, right? So why is that? Why are professional service providers different from restaurants? What is it that allows professional service providers to get away with incompetence? I struggle with that question partly because I grew up in Montana and I tend to have a little bit of a libertarian streak. So I believe in the power of free markets. I think capitalism has a lot of advantages compared to the alternatives. And I'm not a huge fan of letting the government do everything. But this is one part of the free market that I really struggle with, right? Because it doesn't work as well. The professional service provider part of the market doesn't work as well as some of the other parts of the free market. So why do these companies survive? I'm going to give you 3 reasons. I've thought a lot about it. These are the 3 reasons I think those companies survive. Number 1, it's just hard for clients to evaluate quality, right? So that the typical client of a land surveyor or civil engineer is coming to that consultant because they're not the expert. They need help. They need good advice. They need good technical advice. And so most people in that position aren't qualified to evaluate whether their consultant's going to do a good job or a bad job. A lot of people that we work for have never hired a surveyor before and may not ever hire a surveyor again after they're done with our contract. So they struggle to understand what's the difference between a good surveyor and a bad surveyor, or good civil engineer and a bad civil engineer. I think sometimes professional licensing actually makes that more difficult because people assume if you've got a license that you're going to do a good job, and nothing could be farther from the truth than that. Just because a surveyor or civil engineer has a license doesn't mean they're going to do a good job on your project. It doesn't mean they're not incompetent. They could very well be incompetent even with a license. What a license means is they're a good test taker. That's what the license means. So I think it's hard for clients to evaluate the quality. The way I'd illustrate that is if I was out shopping for a new work truck, I would not do a very good job of assessing the quality, the reliability, the durability of the engine in the truck. I'm not a mechanic. I know a little bit about how internal combustion engines work just from what my dad taught me and reading a little bit, but I'm certainly not an expert, and I couldn't work on the engine that's in my truck. And so I'm gonna pop the hood on 2 trucks side by side and have no clue what makes one engine better than the other engine, right? That's just not my area of expertise. So it's hard. It's just hard for clients to evaluate quality. The second reason I think these firms survive is it's hard to enforce the law. So we do have some very specific state laws that dictate what licensed surveyors and civil engineers are supposed to do as they perform their roles. We have a licensing board that regulates us. That's true, I think, of almost every state in the United States. There's a licensing board. There are rules, administrative rules that our licensing board have that we have to follow. And I watch incompetent firms violate those laws all the time. I just got done this last week having a conversation with one of our local counties because somebody went in and built a brand new hospital and wiped out a bunch of monuments and didn't do monument preservation as they were required to under state law. So that's a problem. It's hard to enforce the law. It's expensive. It's hard to catch people doing the wrong thing. You almost have to trip over their work to catch them breaking the law. So it's tough. Enforcement is difficult. I think we could do a better job of it, but it's not. It's never going to be an easy task. Enforcement of the law for professionals is always going to be difficult. And then finally, I think some of these incompetent firms, they manage to survive on basically what I call short-term transactions, right? So, if you're in a strange town, let's say you're on vacation, you may go to a restaurant, eat some bad food, and you may never go back to that town. Maybe the only time you're ever in that town or city. But if there's a bad restaurant in your own hometown, you're only going to go there and get bad food and bad service one time. Then you're not going to go back, right? You're going to know better, right? And so part of what happens with professional service firms, if you think about it, is a lot of the people we work for call us for one survey on one transaction. Not a lot, but there's a few. I'd say 30%. 30% of the people we work for, we might ever work for again. And so it's almost like a restaurant at a truck stop, a one-way truck stop. So you can imagine a freeway, just a freeway that only goes in one direction, and there's a truck stop in the middle of the desert, right? And so people pull off the road and they buy food at this truck stop, and it's horrible food and it's really bad service. But the truck stop stays in business because it's the last time those people will ever see it. Now, I do think the internet has helped a little bit with that. You can at least maybe find some reviews about a particular firm. You might be able to check out their website and get a rough idea for, do these people look like complete idiots, or do they look like they know what they're doing? Do they have a domain name with a professional website? Is there photo on the website? And that's not foolproof, but I think it's better than it used to be. But I think a lot of these companies just survive by, they just live on short-term transactions, so they don't have a lot of good long-term relationships with their clients because they can't keep good clients. So those are the three reasons. Just to review, why do incompetent professional service providers survive? One is it's hard for clients to evaluate quality. So there's a little bit of a break in the normal market feedback that you would get there. Enforcement of the law is lacking. It's hard to enforce the law and to punish incompetent professional service providers. And three, a lot of these service providers just survive on short-term transactions. So, and they're able to do that. They're not getting a lot of repeat business. So what can you do? If you're a prospective client and you have a real estate project and you need to hire a civil engineer or an architect or a title insurance company or a land surveyor, what can you do to not get stuck with one of these incompetent professional service providers? I don't have a foolproof recipe for you, but I'll give you some tips that will help. This isn't a guarantee, but number one is see if you can get a recommendation. Find somebody that works in the real estate industry and say, hey, I'm looking for a good civil engineer. Who might you be able to recommend? That's better than going through the yellow pages. Second, if you're in the real estate business, so if you're a real estate broker or agent, or you're a land developer, build long-term relationships. If you're the type of client that just cycles through consultants, you just pick the cheapest consultant you can find. You don't care who they are or where they're from. You're going to have problems with the type of professional service provider you get, right? You want to cultivate long-term relationships with people, even if it costs you a little more in the short run because you're paying a little more to get good service. In the long run, as you develop that relationship, your consultant's going to care about your business, and I think you're going to get a better result. The third thing is do your homework. You can now with the internet do some research about professional service providers before you hire them. So check their website out. Find out are they a member of their local professional association or their local chamber of commerce. Go to the licensing board. Look up the name of the licensee that's going to be doing the work on your project. Find out if they've got, have they been disciplined? Are they on probation? All that information is available in the public record. That's part of the reason we have a licensing board. And finally, maybe the most important thing is just ask questions. When you're going to hire a consultant for an important real estate project, you want to find out. You want to get to know who you're working with. You're putting a lot of trust in that people. You're giving them a lot of your money. So who are they? How long have they been around? What do they care about? What are the values they run their business by? What type of work do they do? What type of work do they like to do? What type of work do they not like to do? What do they specialize in? And if you call here to hire a land surveyor and the only thing you're interested in about me is the price I'm going to charge you, then you're probably not a good client for my team, and you're probably not going to get a good consultant, see, because you're not asking the right questions. You got to care about something besides just getting the cheapest price you can find. So why do incompetent professional service providers survive? They're like cockroaches, man. They just they crawl from one client to another client, and until they get caught, until they get busted by the licensing board and the law gets enforced or they get sued and go bankrupt, they're going to be around, right? So don't put yourself in a situation where you're trying to run a real estate project with one of those incompetent service providers on board your team.